Hi, everybody. Welcome to Glow with Grace. I am really excited to share an interview with you today with the wonderful Elwin Robinson, all the way over in Portugal right now. Hi, Elwin.
Hi, Angela.
Thank you so much for coming to do this interview. I'm really, really excited to connect with you about this. And we've been kind of backwards and forwards on email, getting this set up, and here we are. So thank you so much.
It's a real pleasure. I mean, so awesome to be able to share this with people who really appreciate it, like yourself. It's awesome. Thank you, Angela.
Yeah, and for anyone, if you're not familiar with Elwin's work, he is a health and wellness author, and he's the founder of Lionheart Herbs, and he has a book out there called Easy Exhaustion Cure and some different programs online. There's the High Energy Academy, and what's the other one? The Taoist?
Taoist Health and Fitness Academy.
Okay. And yeah, all kinds of other things that he gets up to, coaching people and speaking, and lots of videos out there and all kinds of things. And I was kind of recently connected to Elwin's work through hearing an old interview that he did with Tara Warner. If you know Tara Warner, I'm doing one of her herbal courses at the moment, and she threw in this old interview from Elwin, which I'd never heard, and I started to listen to it, and I was like, whoa, I had one of those aha moments, where you were talking about tonic herbs, like Chinese tonic herbs, and I've heard about them, who knows how many times before, but never quite in the way that you described them. And I was just like, whoa, it really spoke to me. And I got so excited about what you were sharing. And I had this strong feeling, like, I really feel like this could help a lot of other new mums, especially. You were talking about things about exhaustion and overwhelm and, just feeling like anxiety and fatigue and all these kind of things that I feel like are pretty much universal among new mothers. And I know
Yeah.
that for me, especially postpartum, since having a child, I just feel so much more susceptible to all of those things, just, exhaustion and overwhelm. And I just feel like my whole kind of like adrenal system is so much weaker, like just run down. And, my whole endocrine system, I feel like the whole thing is, just not in the same kind of space that it was pre having a baby. So yeah, I just got super excited about what you're sharing. And I reached out to you to see if we could do an interview, and you said yes. So thank you for being here.
My great pleasure. Yeah, always wonderful to speak to someone who's so passionate about all this, as you obviously are, and really wonderful to be able to have the opportunity to help.
Beautiful. So maybe let's start with your background. How did you get into what you're doing?
Sure, yeah. So my mother and my father were both quite ill and quite depleted, which kind of relates to what we're talking about. My mother ended up dying of cancer in her mid-50s, and my father had ME and chronic fatigue syndrome in his 40s. So I don't come from the strongest genetic stock. And as a result of that, I was kind of always depleted, really. Ever since I can remember, I was kind of depressed and depleted and unhappy. And as I now realise, that was just a deficiency of energy, really, from birth. And so I quickly fell into kind of stimulant addiction, which is a way of like feeling good for a few hours or a few minutes, whatever, and then back into the kind of pit. And that's really how I lived throughout most of my life up until kind of my mid to late 20s. And then I had this kind of moment of thinking, that's enough. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get healthy. It was like, get healthy or die trying, which sounds a bit weird, but that was really my attitude. Like, I was going to do whatever it takes. And I did all the standard alternative Western stuff. Well, first of all, I tried the conventional route. I went to my doctor in, MD's, kind of no comprehension of really what was going on with me. So, just kind of laughed me out of the office, signed me off work for a month because I was stressed, but that was pretty much it. So I went for the whole alternative Western route and supplements and kind of Western herbs and cleansing and not having gluten and not having dairy and all of that kind of stuff that you hear everywhere in the Western world. And it made no difference. It made me feel no better. In fact, I felt weaker than ever, more depleted than ever, more stressed than ever. I was getting ill more than ever. I kept getting these recurring ear infections and sinus infections and all these kind of issues. And just out of sheer desperation, one day I went into a Chinese herbalist. I was like, those funny looking jars, and I just went in there, and she's like, "Ah, yeah, she said your kidneys are really depleted. I've never seen someone with such depleted kidneys at your age, which is the mid-20s, which is when they're supposed to be at their prime." And she started like squeezing places in my body. She goes, "Does this hurt?" I'm like, "Ah, yes, yes." And like, "Does that hurt?" Ah! As if to prove that she knew what was going on with me. And so she said, your heart and your liver are too hot, which makes your kidneys depleted. And I was like, I have absolutely no idea what that means, but I'm going to find out because it made me feel better. So I did these acupuncture, I did these herbs, and there were some limits to that too. I discovered like she had no idea about diet and detox and all that kind of Western stuff, which is why I ended up being the person who brought the two of them together. But yeah, that was really the first step to me getting better. And after that, I discovered lots of other things, the things that I'm sure you and your audience are aware of, Angela, like alkalizing and liver flushing, which we were just talking about because I did one of those last night. And so I've done all that kind of Western stuff, but I've also incorporated the Eastern stuff. And to be honest, that's what it took to get me to a place to feel good. Like, I know for some people they can just stop eating gluten and suddenly they're the top of the world or whatever. But, for me, it took everything, all the best Western stuff, all the best Eastern stuff. And I got to a point where people started actually saying, "Wow, Elwin, you've really changed. And, can I get some advice?" And so then I started giving people advice, and that's what led us ultimately. And then I realised I was repeating myself over and over again. You probably know the feeling, Angela. So then I wrote a book to say the things that I kept saying over and over again. And then people said, "That's really nice, Elwin, but we'd like your actual support." And then that's when I created the programs and yeah, basically. But the thing that I focused on all along is this depletion, right? Because I think this is something that's so prevalent in the Western world, and there's all kinds of reasons for it. There's our chronic, constant mental stimulation. With Google and Facebook and everything. There's the constant kind of fear and anxiety that we feel with the news and and then there's just this complete lack of understanding of what even normal reproductive processes do to us. So from a Taoist point of view, even just having a baby, right, for a woman, or in fact frequent ejaculation as well for a man, depletes them quite severely of this reserve energy, this kidney energy, this Jing energy. And it seems like no one in the Western world knows about this. So that's kind of my mission, is to help bring some awareness about that, and to say that there are actually options that when you become as depleted as I was, it's not easy. Like I've spoken, you've probably met a lot of the other kind of herbal teachers, Angela, like Ron and George, and each one I've spoken to, they said they all seem to have had chronic fatigue at some point, and they all talk about it took them 5-10 years, something like that, to recover from it. So it's not kind of thing that happens overnight if you are very, very depleted. It doesn't sound like that's the case for you. You're doing well until you had the baby. But for me, and people like myself who are very depleted, it doesn't happen overnight. But what I've discovered is that when your energy is high, not only are you healthier, but everything changes. Like before, my whole world was tainted with fear, and I didn't even know it. It was like a fish who didn't know what water was because it's all I'd ever known, and then suddenly this fear starts lifting and I'm, oh my God, like I could actually do something. I could actually talk to this person. I could actually create this thing. And like this fear started to fade, and this kind of confidence and presence started to come in its place. So there's all kinds of more profound spiritual reasons as well, which you may or may not be interested in talking about, Angela, that really make this so worthwhile as well.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah, I really love that you bring together all of that Eastern and Western ideology all into one packet. Like I said, when you started to talk about the tonic herbs, it was just like this total aha moment for me. So maybe that's kind of the next obvious place to go right now. Can you kind of sum that up for us? Like from your perspective, what is the difference between like a tonic herb and a more kind of like medicinal herb?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how can it help us?
Yeah, so the way I like to view it is that tonic herbs are much closer to foods, like your carrots and your broccoli and all that kind of standard food. And then your medicinal herbs are a lot closer to medication, right? Now, obviously, there's a spectrum here, but there's a general category. So medicinal herbs, you need to be careful. You should not just have them all the time. You should only have them when you need them, if you need them. You need to be careful not to have too much. You need to be careful for not to have them for too extended duration. And the reason is because they're mild poisons, right? And so the difference between a poison and a cure is, in fact, dosage. So that's why you're going to be very careful with them. And so generally when people approach herbs, they approach them with that attitude, like, oh, I've got to be very careful. How much should I take? I shouldn't have too much. Is it dangerous? And all those kind of questions, which are completely valid. Now, for tonic herbs, they deserve to be more in the category of, say, like the coriander that you might put in your curry, or the spinach that you put in your smoothie, rather than seeing them as this kind of dangerous thing. So they're very safe, and yet they're very, very powerful, and yet they are healing. Now, I'll go on a slight tangent about this. Like, throughout most of history and almost all cultures in the world, Angela, there's this kind of tendency to heal people, so to wait until they're ill and then try and fix them, right? And so I think that one of the main reasons for this is because of the way people are paid, right? So in the Western world, and in fact most of the world, the way that a doctor or healer or whatever gets status, the way that they get money to live, all the rest of it, is to fix people once they are ill. Now, in the Taoist kind of system, it was really interesting because it was actually the other way around. You would pay a Taoist tonic herbalist to keep you well. And as soon as you were unwell, then you would stop paying them. So they had a vested interest in keeping you well. And so, yes, there are tonic herbs throughout the world, but the reason why the Chinese tonic herbs are so well known is because they've been 5,000 years like working on this, refining, categorizing, mastering, because they have this attitude of prevention rather than cure. And I think this actually relates a lot to their kind of spiritual kind of philosophy as well. I've been very immersed in the Taoist kind of system recently. I just did a training for a month with a Taoist grandmaster a month ago, which is awesome. And it's just kind of reminded me of how huge the difference is between the Western system and the Eastern system. So the Western system, we basically have this kind of, even if we're not at all Christian or Islamic or Jewish or whatever, we have that kind of idea that as long as I'm good in this life and I behave myself, then I go on to the next life and everything will be okay. That's kind of like our underlying programming, even if we're not religious. Whereas the Eastern system is, listen, you have a chance to develop a spirit. You have a chance to develop a soul. And the longer you are alive, the more that you're going to develop your spirit, the more you're going to develop your soul, the more chance there is that you're going to kind of graduate, as it were, once your life ends. And so they weren't coming from the perspective of, as long as I keep my head down and don't do anything bad, then I'll be all right and I'll be rewarded. They were coming from the perspective of, I need to extend my life as long as possible and live as virtuous a life as possible so that I can progress on to the next level. So it's just a completely different mindset. And so the Taoist tonic herbs, to answer your question, are part of that whole system, right? I was reading Shen Nong's Herbal Pharmacopoeia recently, which is like one of these ancient Taoist texts, and it's all about, we'll extend lifespan, we'll let the spirit soar. That's what it says over and over again. So it's to free the spirit and to extend the lifespan. That's what all the tonic herbs are good for. If you look at like this, about 150, something like that in the book, and all of them are extends lifespan, lets the spirit soar. Extends lifespan, lets the spirit soar. So that's like the big picture of the tonic herbs. And then the more Western scientific things to say that they're double directional and they help to bring you back into balance. So if you are, say if you have an excess of fire in your system, which might lead to inflammation, then they will calm that down. But if you're the other way around, if you have an excess of coal in your system, then they will build that back up to the right level. So they're balancers and harmonizers.
So some examples of tonic herbs, in case anyone doesn't have a clue what we're talking about, would be things like Schisandra, right, and goji berries, reishi, shiitake, maitake, hoshi, wu. And then in your book, there was a whole load of other names that I was just like, I have no idea what any of those are. I've never seen those names before. But yeah, those were the ones that were kind of familiar to me. And I'm sure most people who are watching this have probably heard of those kind of things. And what I really loved about your Easy Exhaustion Cure book, I just read it in the last few days. We connected and you sent me your book over to take a look at. And, I'm not a big fan of ebooks, to be honest, even though I've written many myself. It's just not something that happens a lot, that I like sit and read a book on a computer. It's just not really my thing. And your book's like 304 pages long. I was like, oh man, how is this going to happen? But I just like blasted through that thing. And I just think it is such a powerful book. And I'm so excited to, just like share this with people and encourage people to go and check it out, because there's stuff in there that can really be life-changing for people. And you make it so easy for people to understand and to access. Like, the whole book is broken into like what is the most important thing for people to do who are in this kind of state of just like exhaustion and rundown and overwhelmed. And actually the subtitle of the book, I believe, is something for, let me see what it is, for overwork. What is it?
Yeah, very close. For workaholics and overachievers.
Workaholics and overachievers, which, I don't think I've ever been a workaholic, but I think I can identify with the overachieving aspect. And I feel like the information in here is suitable for like most of the Western population, actually. Like, I can understand, like, that you kind of narrowed it down just to, like, be clear about who it's for. But I feel like this information is so powerful for so many people. And yeah, everything is broken down into kind of like gold, silver, and bronze. Like, these are the most important things for somebody right now to do who's in a state of just like exhaustion and overwhelm. And I love how you just make it so simple for the reader. If you're in that kind of state of just like everything is too much, you don't want to like have some huge new program that you got to do this and that. And I love how you also say the only things that we're going to focus on are what you eat and what you drink and how you rest, because you're going to do those things anyway, regardless of like whether you're reading this book or not. And we're not going to tell you like 50,000 other things to do. So I just think it's like poetry, the way that this book is put together. I think it's so beautiful. And I really want to commend you on that. Before we started recording, I was saying to you, I really feel like this is just like such a download, this book. Like, this just has a life of its own somehow. Like, it wanted to come through and share this material with people. And I'm sure you must have had incredible feedback from people about this book.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I've had people who've recovered from supposedly incurable conditions like ME, like fibromyalgia, like chronic fatigue, come to me and on all kinds of other things. Probably I shouldn't even mention those legally. I don't know what the deal is, but I didn't claim anything. They said it. They said that they've, just incredible the way that it's turned them around from those kind of severe conditions. And I wasn't expecting that, to be honest, Angela. I think I even said in the book, listen, if you're severely depleted, then you might well need more than this, right? If you're, very, very out of fuel. But nonetheless, a lot of people used it to turn them around. And so for those people who were not severely depleted, it's been a revelation. Yeah, and I've got people who are with me now who do everything, whenever I launch a new program, they're always there, and the reason is because the Easy Exhaustion Cure got them started, and now they want to get to the next level, and they want to get to the next level. And that's where the health and fitness one came from. It is the people asking, "Oh, I really love all this stuff, but now I've recovered and I've done the basics. Now I want to do some of the more advanced practices," and giving them that. Are you mosquito hunting?
I'm like mosquito madness on this end. Stop trying to bite me. Yeah, I love it. So
thank you.
Yeah, and what I also love about it as well is that for me personally, like so much of what you recommend in the book, it's like things that I already had around the house anyway. Like all these different things. I'm like, I have that over there. It's bringing everything together in the kind of like cohesive way to like nourish my body in a different way, instead of, I could have 50,000 different products in the house, but if I don't know like which ones are the best for this moment and like what's really going to help me right now, what difference does it make? So just the last few days, based on going through your whole book, I read the whole book in like a matter of hours. It was crazy. yeah, just, picking up a few things from that reading and starting to apply them, I seriously feel the differences already. I know I sound like an infomercial or something, but I do. Great.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting this, by the way. Last time we spoke, you hadn't read it yet, so this is all new to me. But I'm
Yeah,
delighted. I'm so happy for you.
yeah, I really, really appreciate it. And that's why I feel so excited about it for other mums as well. Because like I said, I feel like this is just, it's the story pretty much of being a new mum in a Western society, right? It's just
Mm.
like, you're just always tired and just strung out and exhausted, and you never get enough sleep and all of those kind of things. And what I love is that you talk about, you specify it into this thing of the kidney energy, the reserve energy, the Jing energy. Maybe we can talk about that whole thing for a bit, because I'd also never really heard it explained in this way, like our adaptive energy, our possibility to adapt to the situations around us. Can you kind of explain that whole thing and how that gets depleted?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing to clarify about that energy is that we get it from our parents, right? And so some people get a lot, and some people don't get very much. So that's why I explained right at the beginning of my story. Listen, this is what was going on for my parents, to explain why I started off with so little, right? And so for some people, it can feel like the cards are kind of stacked against them, right? And this is the kind of person you've probably seen going to your retreats and at health events and stuff, and they're like, Angela, I've been doing all of this, I've been eating organic food and I've been cleansing, and I still feel horrible. What is going on? And so that's often what it is. It's the depletion of this adaptive energy. So I call it adaptive reserve energy. And so there's two main functions of it from my point of view. Number one, they're your reserves, right? And so the idea of your reserves is they're supposed to be there for emergencies only. But what happens is when we don't have enough energy to just see us through the day, usually through poor eating or digestion, or, and more likely, poor breathing. Most of us were chronically tense, we've got bad posture, then we don't breathe properly, then we don't have enough chi, which is our energy, our everyday energy, so then we have to dip into our reserves. And how do we dip into our reserves? We dip in via stress, we dip in via drugs, especially stimulants, right? So coffee or tobacco or alcohol or cannabis or any of these drugs, anything that's an adrenal stimulant, is going to dip into your reserves, make you feel better for a bit, and then leave you more depleted afterwards. So that's all using up your reserve energy. And so that's supposed to be there, as I say, for emergencies. It's supposed to be like if a tiger is chasing you, or if you just got stabbed and your body's got to recover, otherwise it will die. Then all this reserve energy that's supposed to be there in storage, ready and waiting, will jump to the rescue, and you'll escape the tiger, or you'll magically recover from the wound that you've been dealt. That's the kind of thing that it's really there for. It's not there for just dragging yourself out of bed and taking yourself to the office, or taking yourself through another day of trying to rear your kid on your own without any help, or whatever it is that people use it for. So that's the reserve side. Now the adaptive side, this is really interesting from my point of view. From an evolutionary point of view, right? Charles Darwin said that the species that's most likely to survive is not the biggest, not the strongest, not the fastest, not even the cleverest. It's the one that's the most adaptive, right? The most able to adapt. And so the interesting thing is that ability to adapt exactly correlates with that level of reserve energy, because they are the same, right? And so the interesting thing about childbirth, because of course that's where you came into this from, Angela, like I said, I got mine from my parents, right? But guess what happened to my parents when I got mine from my parents, right? It wasn't created out of thin air. They gave it to me, and more specifically, my mother gave it to me. And so as a mother, what you do is you take a big chunk of that reserve energy that's supposed to be there only for emergencies, that many of us use without realizing it, just to get through the day. And for a while that can be okay. But if you've been spending that for a while just to get through the day, maybe you've been drinking coffee every day, or maybe you've been whatever, and then you give away a big chunk of it as well, suddenly you're like left in this position. Oh. And then the challenge is when you feel like when you know you don't have the reserves, and when you know that you can't adapt to things, then you start to get scared, right? You start to feel this anxiety, you start to feel this fear, you start to feel this uncertainty, lack of confidence. The mind also tends to go crazy. You start to have more and more and more nervous thoughts. I don't know if you've noticed that, Angela. It's harder to calm the mind down, maybe harder to meditate than it used to be, right? So we might think that as the energy reduces, the mind will calm down, but no, it's the opposite. As the energy reduces, the mind goes quicker and quicker and quicker and more unfocused and haphazard and all over the place. And so we're left in this position where we feel very vulnerable. And so the mind is now spinning, burning up more and more of that reserve energy, right? The anxiety is getting our adrenal glands going, burning up more and more that reserve energy. So we end up in this vicious circle, right, where the situation promotes anxiety and overstimulation, and then the overstimulation and the anxiety create the depletion. And so this is the kind of trap that I was stuck in. This is a trap that I noticed so many new mothers that suddenly stuck in, when they were pretty much fine before. They would have, got on okay if it weren't for that, but they give this chunk of energy and suddenly they're like, oh, I'm so much more anxious. And I thought it was because I wasn't sleeping, and I thought it was because of, whatever. But then maybe they do start sleeping again, once the kids sleep through the night, and all these excuses that they had. And yet the anxiety is still there, the depletion is still there, the lack of confidence is still there. And they like, what is up? And of course, all the physical symptoms that come with it. The immune system gets lower. We're more likely to suffer from those kind of illnesses, or a candida, which is then a systemic problem, and on and on and on and on. And it all basically starts through a lack of these reserves. And so what the Taoist says, these reserves are worth more than anything. They're worth more than golds, jewelry, diamonds. To be honest, to me, they're worth more than wisdom. They're worth more than love. They're worth more than any other thing that you can say. Because very simply, if you don't have your energy, if you don't have your reserves, you can't appreciate any of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you've got 100 people around you who all love you. If you're stuck in a fear state because you're so depleted, then you're stuck in a fear state because you're so depleted, right? So this, to me, like, if it's an issue, like if you're watching this and you're like, oh, none of that sounds familiar for me, Elwin, then fine, fair enough. But if this is an issue, like, this is the first thing you need to look at. Not that everything else doesn't matter, not that you shouldn't detox, but just don't detox while you are very depleted, because detoxing uses up more of your reserve energy, especially if you're really quite challenged. Not that you shouldn't do exercise, not that you shouldn't do strength training or whatever, but do it once you've got your reserves back up. Not that you shouldn't do any of the other million things, not that you shouldn't look at the liver, not that you shouldn't look at the intestines, not that you shouldn't do anything else, but if the kidneys are depleted, always start with those. And that's what you were saying about, that's probably why the easy exhaustion cure made so much sense to you, Angela. You've had all these different things telling you to do all these different things, and then at last, like, someone's telling you, just heal the kidneys. And you're like, yes.
Totally, yeah. And it's been so interesting for me. I have never even thought about my kidneys. Like, I have no kind of like even concept of them or relationship to them or anything. I mean, I appreciate them. I'm glad they've been there like all these years, but I've never thought about them. And just in the last few months of my life, all of this stuff has started to come up about my kidneys and my adrenals, like all the time, all these signposts, like talking to me about my adrenals and my kidneys. And I actually, at one point, probably now about 4 months ago, had a really intense episode with my kidneys. I've seriously never even felt anything from my kidneys. And I had this one day where I went into like chronic pain in my kidneys. And I just knew, like, this is my kidneys. And I was just kind of like knocked off my feet. I think I even vomited at one point. I was just like in this chronic state. And it was at a point where there was a lot of stressful stuff going on. And a good friend actually said to me, the kidneys are all about fear. There's something going on there. There's something going on about fear, and your body's trying to manage this, and it's your adrenals and your kidney energy. And I was just like, yeah, whatever. I didn't have any tools, it felt like, at that point to really do anything about it. I did a couple of things, and I came out of that like extreme kidney slump. But it's really interesting for me how, all of this stuff has unfolded where, I had no kind of background or interest in kidneys at all. Like, kidneys? Like, what about my kidneys? Like, who cares about my kidneys? And it's kind of hilarious to me that actually this seems to be like the root of all of it, actually, is like this kidney reserve adaptive energy. I mean, I guess it isn't necessarily just about the kidneys anyway, right? It's about like the whole kind of adrenal system and everything connected to that. But
Yeah, shall I go into that for a second, Angela?
yeah,
Yeah, so when
please.
we say kidneys, we're kind of saying kidneys with a capital K rather than a little k. So that's like the Taoist term for it relates to the water element, right? So the water part of you. So in terms of practicalities, it relates to the bladder, right? And often fear relates to the bladder. This is where when we're anxious, we go to the toilet a lot. It relates to the whole reproductive system. And in fact, other than the kidneys themselves, that's where a lot of this jing, this reserve energy is stored. It is stored in the reproductive system. And so this is where when the reproductive system is used in the case of pregnancy and childbirth, if it's used in the case of menstruation, if it's used in the case of ejaculation, all these things are actually depleting the jing. The kidneys actually relate to the whole brain and central nervous system, especially the hind part of the brain, like the limbic part of the brain, which of course relates to that tendency for depression as well as anxiety. It relates to the bones, joints, and tendons as well, right? And so the classic signs of the kidneys not being healthy are that the lower back is in pain, also that the knees are in pain. So pain in all the joints and tendons. And in terms of the kind of more Western things that people would recognise, I would relate it to acidity, right, as opposed to alkalinity. If there's a general situation of systemic acidity throughout the body, I would relate it to demineralisation, right, especially the primary electrolytes like sodium, magnesium, potassium, also calcium, probably in that order. And I would relate it to dehydration. Right, and that's not just I haven't drunk water recently. That's dehydration really chronically on a cellular level. So those are all the things that we're looking at. And so if you're aware that you're dehydrated and you're aware that you're acidic and you're aware that you're low in minerals, looking at the nails is a good sign for that. Then that's a good indicator that your kidneys are low and weak. So it's not just about the kidneys, but the kidneys are still the root of it. And so when you have that experience like you had, Angela, where your kidneys are like literally in pain and screaming out to you like, heal me, then that's a pretty clear sign that your kidneys would like your attention.
Totally. And so if people are listening to this, especially new mothers, and they're saying, yes, that's me, I feel all those things, I feel exhausted and stressed and anxious and overwhelmed and all those kind of things, I'd love to go into some practical things of what people can do. And what I really love about your book as well is that you kind of lay it all out in 3 sections. Like the first thing is for people to recharge this energy, this Jing adaptive reserve energy that has been depleted. So we recharge it, and then it's about storing it up, and then it's about conserving it, so using it wisely. And I love that you talk about it's kind of like it's almost like we want to become an energy millionaire. Like you kind of relate it to money, like the idea of the energy being kind of like money. You don't want to kind of suddenly acquire a mass of money and then you just like burn it all up in a flash. And it's kind of the same with the energy. Like if you are at a point in your life right now where you do feel like you're just exhausted and strung out all the time and like everything is too much, and then you do suddenly like kick all this energy into your system, you don't want to just like vroom, like burn it all up and then it's gone. So I love that you cover all of those things. So
and that's so common, Angela. Even in my last coaching call, I had a couple of people talk about that. They said, "Oh, I did all what you recommended. It worked. I felt a lot better, and so I did 3 times as much work, and now I feel pretty much the same." And I think a lot of the time when we are exhausted, we always feel like we're a million miles behind. And then when we do all this stuff and we actually do get a burst of energy, oh, good, now I can catch up, and then we end up right where we started. So yeah, learning how to spend it is also crucial. And that relates more to Shen, which relates more to the heart and the liver. And most people think, I don't have an issue with my heart. Generally, we don't have heart problems until we're in our 50s or 60s, right? Then we go to the doctor and suddenly they start warning us about cholesterol and all that kind of thing. But we always think up until that point, no problem with my heart. But actually, usually the heart is kind of like one of the roots of this imbalance. So if you are in a position where you are very depleted, then inevitably, childbirth, especially if it's repeatedly, can be one huge factor in that. But ultimately, it's also going to be because you have a tendency for your heart to overheat. And so what the Taoists say is that the heart is full of fire, right, up here, and then your kidneys are full of water down where your kidneys are. And so when the heart burns too brightly, that dries up the kidneys, that depletes the kidneys of energy. And so you see that in people who are, and that's why I call it that, workaholics and overachievers, right? The people who push themselves really hard, and that often they are the kind of people who care very deeply. They're the kind of people who feel like they have a mission. They're the kind of people who are very passionate. They're the kind of people who feel driven. And so a lot of the time, and a lot of people think, see, this is where the kind of more Western morality doesn't make sense. It's like, I'm such a good person, and I go around helping all these people, and I make the world a better place, and now I'm exhausted, and I'm depleted, and I'm anxious, and I'm, and here's my neighbour, and he doesn't care about anyone but himself, she doesn't care about anyone but themselves, they just plod along, and they seem to be fine. It's not fair. But of course, it's not about fair, it's just about an energetic situation. And so if you are one of those kind of people like me, like I suspect you, Angela, though I don't know you very well yet, like my friend Shazzy, for instance, we're those kind of people who push very hard because we care, then you have to be aware of that, and you have to doubly look after your kidneys. You have to, whatever it is that everyone else has to do, and like you say, it could apply to everyone, you have to do it twice as much, because otherwise you have that tendency to spend it all again.
Right. Okay, so let's go into some of the practical things that you share in your book, and that people can jump on and do if they are identifying with all these kind of things that we're talking about. I guess, let's start with some of the Taoist herbs for tonifying the kidneys, for helping replenish that energy that's been run down. You want to tell us about some of those herbs?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll go for 4. The first one I'll mention just very briefly is goji berries, just because I think everyone already knows it, everyone is aware of them. But as you say, Angela, they might be in your cupboard, but you haven't used them in months, right? So if you know your kidneys are depleted, have your handful of goji berries a day, or you can have it in extract form or whatever you like. Schisandra is my favourite of the Taoist tonic herbs for the kidneys. It's probably not the most powerful, I'm going to go over that in a second, but what it is amazingly all-purpose, so it's good for everything. It's good for the liver as well, and generally when we have problems with the kidneys, we have problems with the liver. And the best thing about it to me is its properties of holding in energy. So it's that part 2 of the 3 parts that you said there, Angela. So not allowing the energy to drain away. Because to carry that metaphor a little bit further, what we were talking about before, our kidneys are kind of like 2 bowls containing this water, which is this life force, like the battery. And so the more depleted we become, more it's like there's little holes in the bowls, so that this water's energy is draining away. And again, the Taoists would say this is the case of someone who's excessively sweating, this case is someone who's excessively urinating, even excessively ejaculating. These are all signs that someone's losing that water. And so Schisandra locks in that water and keeps it there, so that the last thing you want to do, of course, if you're low in something, is to have it drain away without you doing anything. So that's why Schisandra is so powerful to me in this particular context. Then there's Romania, so prepared Romania. Now this is, if you look at all the classical Chinese formulations for kidneys, this is always like the main, not always, but the vast majority of the time it's the main ingredient, and like 50%, 60% of the formula is going to be Romania. This is huge. So they call this the kidney's own food, and I tend to have this in extract form, but this is something that you can actually have in its raw form as well. They come in like these little black coins, kind of sticky, black, slightly sweet tasting. Obviously, you need to make sure you get good quality. You've got to be careful with everything in this world. But if you get a good quality one, you can actually eat them. And so a lot of the time, like I'll give them to someone, and then they'll be like, and they're like, I'm surprised because it's like smoky and sweet at the same time, but I like it. And like, yeah, well, that's because your kidneys need it. So it's kind of like a funny little way that you can tell if you ever get your hands on prepared Romania. If you actually enjoy eating it, you probably really need it. So that's a really, really excellent replenisher, right? So we've had the holder in of energy, which is Schisandra. We've got the replenisher, which is the Romania. So that's like taking a jug and pouring in more water, right? And then we've got Shoud Do. And Shoud Do, very famous, I think, in the kind of raw food world. And that's a little bit of both. So it is replenishing, and it's kind of strengthening our capacity to hold that Jing energy. It's not kind of sealing it, but it's strengthening it. And so this is the famous, one of the other things that the kidneys relate to is hair. And so we have prematurely fading away hair, and yes, I've got that again. When I was in my mid-20s, it was like this, and it was fading away rapidly. And it's one of the things that kind of freaked me out, like, whoa, what is going on here? And I'm happy to say that, 6-7 years later, it hasn't grown back, but it hasn't receded anymore. If you see my videos a few years ago, it's exactly the same. So that's a sign that the kidneys are getting stronger. And so that's one of the things that Hoshi Wu is very famous for. Mr. Blacken hair, or help hair regrow again. So those are like my top kidney herbs. I'll give an honourable mention to Chaga as well, if I'm allowed a fifth one, which has the benefit of being a Shen tonic, so really good for the heart and the liver as well as being another powerful Jing replenisher. Can I go for more? How many do you want?
Go on then. 3 more.
I'll go for one more, and that would be cordyceps. So cordyceps is this funky kind of mushroom. The way that we get it, it's normally a mushroom grown in a lab, but the way that it is traditionally found would be that it's a fungus which takes over an insect and kind of eats it alive and replaces it. So you get this thing that looks like a caterpillar, but it's actually 100% vegetarian because all of the caterpillar has been eaten and replaced by this fungus. I've made it sound totally unappealing, I know, but it's kind of interesting. And talking about totally unappealing things, do you want a totally unappealing weird one, Angela?
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
for the sake of novelty. One of the most powerful Jing herbs, although almost no one really likes the idea, and I do mention it in the Easy Exhaustion Cure, I think, and that's ant, Polyrachis ant. Now again, I know there's probably lots of vegans watching. I actually don't really use the ant. I'm almost a pure vegan. But not because I feel like everyone should be, just because it kind of works for me. But for those who it's suitable for, ant is really powerful. It's especially powerful as a meat replacer for anyone who doesn't want to eat meat. Like my uncle, for instance, he's a great example of this. He's a classic carnivore. He's like a martial artist trained for 30 years. He used to be a hunter, so he's not exactly a standard vegan type of guy. But he was aware that it was, that all this meat was adding a lot of acidity to his body and maybe exacerbating some things. So I suggested having this ant instead, and he started having the ant, and he said he didn't feel the need for meat anymore. And then he said one day he was walking along the road in Brighton in the UK, and he smelled, he was outside a kebab shop, and he's like, oh my god, that lamb. He started salivating at the idea of it, and then he realised that he hadn't had his ant, had run out a few days before, and he'd forgot to ask me for any more. So I think that there's something that Western science hasn't quite identified yet, that the East says there's yang jing. There's a particular kind of jing in animal foods that you don't get in pretty much, not all, but pretty much all vegan foods. And so there's a very, very large amount of that in the Polyrachis ant. So the yang jing relates more to those qualities of confidence and assertiveness and energy and courage and those kind of more maybe traditionally considered masculine traits. And so in terms of a herb which just gives you a boost of power. So let's say you're someone who's not very depleted, but you're kind of feeling tired and you'd like to go to the gym but you don't really feel like it, then ant can be like an example of something that will really give you that boost.
Wow. Amazing. And so all of these herbs, if someone's listening to this and thinking, well, that's great, but how do I take these things? I guess the main recommendation is to take these in a tea form, right? Like tea or tablets.
It's a good question, yeah. I mean, for years I used to sell these raw teas, and basically it would involve getting like a lump of stuff. I had one customer affectionately refer to it as forest sweepings, I remember he called it. It looks really weird. Like it looks like a bunch of random twigs and stuff, and then they would have to cook it themselves. And so many customers had endless problems with this that eventually we switched over to using extract powders. Once I was sure that I got a really, really good quality source. So now I would say it depends on where you're coming from. I would recommend either going for a good quality extract powder or going for the raw like herb and actually cooking it yourself. I mean, I'd say cooking it yourself is probably slightly better. It depends. Like having the extract powders is cheaper because there's much less weight to ship, so there's certainly that going for it. And it's easier to control the dosages. It's a lot easier to make. So for people who are exhausted, I was so happy to be able to offer it in the extract powder form that was really good quality, because I was like, at last, all those people who told me that they tried to do my program and then they couldn't cook the herbs, or like at one point, Angela, I was living with 5 other people in a house and they banned me from cooking my Chinese herbs because of the smell, so there's all kinds of derogatory, detrimental effects. Unfortunately, then I started cooking it in my room with a little like one hob thing, like with underneath a window, and then a little fan blowing. So I was quite dedicated to it, but I realised most people won't go to that length. So yeah, I would suggest either go for some kind of extract powder, or if you can make the tea yourself, great.
And then how would people take the powders? Would they put those with like hot water and drink them, or put them in a smoothie, or how do you?
Great question. Yeah, a lot of people in the raw food world, they think putting it in the smoothie is the best thing, and it can be. I would prefer putting it in hot water for a few different reasons. First of all, it's going to be pure and on its own, right? If we put it in a smoothie, it gets caught up in a lot of other things, and is that okay? Sure, but if they tend to be reasonably expensive, all these herbs, right? So for most people, if you're putting, say, some of your precious Hoshi Wu or Shizandra or whatever in with a load of other superfoods, it's going to tend to get lost in there. Your body's only going to assimilate and digest a certain percentage of it. So if you just put it in a cup of hot water, add a bit of stevia to it, add a bit of lemon, if you want to adjust the taste a little bit to make it a little bit more palatable, and just drink it. And there's something nice about having a warm cup of tea, anyway, right? I mean. You know that, Angela, as a British person. But yeah, there's something really, really nice about just having a warm cup of tea, especially if you're a raw food person, and you don't normally have warm things. So that would be my preferred recommended way of doing it. But you can do anything. I mean, some people would just get it and put it in their mouth and munch on it. I wouldn't do that with some of the herbs, but with some of them, like Hoshi Wu, goji berry powder, it is actually nice enough to do that.
Yeah. Ah, okay. So in your book, you mentioned some of your herbal blends that you've made for your Lionheart Herbs site. So are they like the Rejuvenate? I think, for example, you have something called Rejuvenate.
That's the one. Yes. And I was going to say, yeah. So to make things simple, you can just get Rejuvenate.
Is that like a powdered thing?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah, that's in the powdered form, yeah. As I say, I used to sell loose bags of it, but I just had such a high percentage of people freaking out about it and all the rest of it that we moved over to the powder. And especially if you're busy and depleting all the rest of it, it's infinitely easier. So just get like anything from 1 to 3 teaspoons, depending on how sensitive you are. Some people, I'm not very sensitive to these things. Some people like even half a teaspoon. For some people, it's just like wow, like amazing. For other people, they're like they don't even notice that and they need to have more. So again, because it's not medicine, this is a lot of people get confused about this. So I'm like, yeah, have anything from half a teaspoon to 3 teaspoons full, and they're like, whoa, that sounds like a big range. It's like, yeah, it's because it's kind of like a food, It's like the way that with chilies, to warm you up. Some people might need a speck and some people might need a whole one, it kind of just depends. So, yeah, start off with a low dose. If you don't feel like it's doing much, it should feel like it's doing something. Like you really said, Angela, you're noticing it straight away. So if the kidneys are depleted and you're taking kidney herbs, it shouldn't be a case of like with most supplements, like, is it working? I don't know. I can't really tell. I suppose it is. I mean, the advert said it would, We should actually be able to feel it, right? So if it's not doing anything after a few days, then by all means increase it to the level where it's actually noticeable, you actually feel better. But of course, just herbs alone aren't necessarily going to turn around a very depleted situation. We do need a delivery agent, right? And so one of those things is hydration. So a lot of people are extremely dehydrated, which also relates to electrolyte depletion, right? So when I tell most people who are exhausted that they're dehydrated, do you know what they say, Angela?
I'm going to drink some water.
I wish it were that easy. They say, yeah, they often say that, and then they say, oh, I tried drinking some water and I really didn't like it, and it made me feel sick, and I really didn't want it. And for about a year and a half, I just struggled with this. I was like, these people, they don't drink their water, they don't do these basic things. And then I realised, actually, it was me, I was totally wrong, I was ignorant. There's something I didn't realise. And so what I didn't realise is just how depleted in electrolytes exhausted people are. Especially sodium, if they're of the healthy type, which is most of my clients. Especially also potassium, if they're not the healthy type, and for both, magnesium. And so what happens is, if you take a human body that's already very depleted in electrolytes, and then you try and get them to drink water, they feel bad, like ugh. There's like this revulsion kind of sensation that a lot of people feel. So if you are depleted in water and yet you can't get yourself to drink water, probably the starting point for hydration is actually electrolytes, and most specifically usually salt, right? So salt is used up by adrenal activity, salt is used up by the kidney's being depleted, basically. So obviously we don't want bad salt, we want good salt. I'm sure your audience already knows about that. But a lot of what they may not know is just how much you sometimes need if you're very depleted. So people I've worked with chronic fatigue, sometimes it's like 3 teaspoons, 4 teaspoons a day. That's what they need to pick themselves back up again. And suddenly they feel fine. And I've had that happen like with a client who spent like maybe $1,000 on, like health products in the last year, and tens of thousands on practitioners, and God knows all these things over the course of years, and then like salt, which is like a few cents per teaspoon or whatever. It's like, it's like ding, the light comes on. And it's just such a simple remedy. Now, just to say that, don't like have this thing for anyone watching. Elwin says everyone should eat loads of salt. No. If your blood pressure is high, if you have a tendency towards edema, if you have a yang rather than a yin constitution, then you probably don't need salt. Maybe you need less salt, maybe you need more potassium. So it's not everyone, but this particular kind of person that we're talking about here, who's depleted, very likely that you need more salt. And so people ask me, how much? How do I know? And I say, basically, it's very simple. When you've had the right amount of salt, when you're thirsty for the right amount of water. So, for most people, the average size, the average amount of exercise, right? Who live fairly sedentary, it's just the average size, maybe 150 pounds, right? 70 kilos, something like that. It's about 2 litres a day, right? Give or take. Maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more. And so if you only feel like drinking, like a pint of water a day, then that's a great sign that you're salt depleted. Because people are like, I know I should drink water, and I'm going to bring a bowl with me and aim to drink it by the end of the day and all this kind of stuff. But the truth is, it shouldn't be a struggle. It should be a desire. It should be something that we just want to do, to have enough water. So yeah, salt, hydration, also magnesium, which we could go into for ages, but I won't. Potassium, these kind of basic minerals are so fundamental. And so the reason I wanted to add that is, if you have the herbs, but say for instance you are severely depleted in sodium, it may not rock your world. It may not make a huge difference, because you've kind of put the cart before the horse. But if you have the basic building blocks, if you have the water to transport the waste out and the nutrients from the herbs into your cells, if you have the electrolytes to do the same thing, then you start having the herbs, then you're going to feel it. You're going to feel great.
Love it. All right. I want to touch on a few of the other things that you mentioned that I've been doing that really speak to me.
Great.
Marine phytoplankton. So this is like classic example of stuff that, for us, maybe everybody doesn't have this sitting around in their house, but we do. And it's one of those things that it's just kind of like, yeah, okay, marine phytoplankton, whatever. Like, I don't ever use it, but in your book about the different benefits of it, and I was like, okay, go and get the marine phytoplankton. Here it is. Start putting in my water and my juice and stuff, and I love it. This is one of the things that I've been doing the last few days that I feel like is really making a difference. So maybe can you talk to us a little bit about this guy? Like, what's this guy doing for us?
Absolutely. So like it's not as basic as fundamental, but funnily enough, that one that you just held up, the Ocean's Alive or whatever the label on it, it's actually got quite a decent amount of salt in as well, so it gives you a little boost of that, as well as having all the different minerals. But yeah, talking about the marine phytoplankton. So the first thing is, again, a lot of people are really deficient EPA and DHA, and that's another thing, like water, like salt, that's just so basic. And so a lot of us struggle to get enough of it. Now, if you're a vegan, vegetarian, I'm not sure if you are, Angela, or in fact what you do, but yeah. So then it's really hard to get enough. In fact, it's pretty much impossible, right? And so these days we have the algae oil, right, which you probably do in your store, maybe just the last year, something like that. But when I wrote the book, that wasn't available yet. So the best source is that marine phytoplankton. Now, I still recommend and take and use every day the marine phytoplankton, even though we have the algae oil now, because as well as having that EPA, DHA, well, first of all, it's instantly absorbable, right? So many people have got such poor digestions, which are so overloaded with all kinds of things. So even if we take the fish oil, we take the algae oil, we're not digesting very much of that. We're not getting very much of that into the cells where it actually needs to go. Whereas with the marine phytoplankton, we put it under the tongue, right, as we've probably been doing. It will go sublingually, just straight into the bloodstream, straight into the cells. And so while there isn't a huge amount of bulk of EPA and DHA in there, it's the form of it, the delivery of it means that we can get a really, really immediate hit of it, and then straight away our mood improves, straight away our mind clears, straight away maybe inflammation goes down, and so these are like immediate benefits. And then what else is good about marine phytoplankton? Well, everything, right? It's got all the minerals I just talked about, it's got the chlorophyll, it's got various other antioxidants as well, it's got ATP, that's the thing I love about it most. So this instant burst of energy. The only other thing that I mentioned in the program that has that as well is the ant. But again, you're probably not going to take ant anytime soon. And so marine phytoplankton just gives you an immediate burst, again, of energy. So you take some marine phytoplankton, and yeah, you know, it's one of those things, yeah, it's fairly expensive. But for me, like, I wrote these exhaustion cure on marine phytoplankton. You know, the way most writers, they use coffee or cigarettes or whatever to keep them going. I just use marine phytoplankton. Like every hour, I'd have another dropper full of that stuff, and you know, it just kept me going, kept my brain going. So, in fact, yeah, you said some kind of moving through me inspiration thing or whatever. Well, it was marine phytoplankton inspired. The whole book basically came out of that. So yeah, really powerful, because there's so few things in the natural health kind of world that give you an instant boost. You know, that's what everyone wants. I mean, sure, everyone knows that prevention is better than cure, and everyone knows it's, you know, good to do things for long-term benefit, but most of us just want to get through the next 5 minutes, you know, or the next hour or the next day. So that's what's so awesome about marine phytoplankton. It's just instant, you know, your brain sharpens, your brain clears, you got a hit of energy, you got a hit of alkalinity, you got a hit of minerals, your kidneys are boosted. It's just awesome.
Yeah, and it's not stimulating in the sense of, you know, coffee or raw chocolate or something like that, where you're going to have a come down afterwards. It's just, it's so clean.
Do you mind if I talk about stimulants for a second, Angela? Because I think so many people don't understand what they are. I'm sure you do, but this bears repeating. The reason, because I used to have 10, 20 coffees a day. I used to work as a chef in a busy restaurant, and there was like lattes on tap all day. And like I said, I was depleted, but I also had this hot-hearted tendency of wanting to be the best at everything, be the best chef. So I said coffee, and then cigarette. This is how I like got through the day, just constant stimulants. And so I always knew that there was something bad about the coffee, especially. Like, I knew the smoking is bad. I knew there was something bad about the coffee. I knew it gave me energy, and there's something bad about it, and that's as much as I knew. And so then later I learned that it's a stimulant. Okay, so it's giving you a boost of energy, but it's draining you of this reserve force, right? And so that's bad enough. But then I learned the next step, and that's, how does it drain the life force? Why isn't adrenaline a stimulant? Adrenal stimulant? It's because it's a poison, right? I'm not just picking on coffee here. True for all stimulants. They're stimulating you because they're poisoning you, right? And so, you know, a lot of people, oh, you know, that's fanatical, that's extreme, you know, and there's nothing wrong with a bit of coffee, nothing wrong with a bit of whatever. There's this kind of mentality out there. I'm seeing it in the raw food world as well, you know, at the moment, and now is this idea of, if you have coconut oil with the coffee, it's not so bad because, you know, because it's slowed down, it's, you know, but does it mean it's not a poison? No, it's still a poison, you know. Now, it's a medicinal herb, in fact, because we said earlier, medicinal herbs are poisons, right? So in a certain context, let's say that, you know, you have to run to the next village and warn them of a coming, you know, attack by another village. It's awesome to have some coca leaves or to have some coffee or whatever. It's totally worth it to release a little bit of this reserve energy for a worthwhile goal. You could even say maybe it's worthwhile to write a book or to do something which benefits all of humanity. Not that we want to do that, but you could say it is. But the way most people are using the stimulants, they don't realise they're poisoning themselves to release a little bit of reserve energy just to get through the day. And obviously, if that sounds like I'm talking down to anyone, you know, Mr. Most guilty of that, more guilty of that than most people, having like 50 hits of a stimulant per day. And God, did I feel stupid when I realised. So just want to prevent anyone who isn't already aware of that from making the same mistake. And for anyone who's, all this, you know, anti-stimulant thing, I would say just try it. You know, for all of those who have all these stories in their head, like I did, about how coffee is okay and how alcohol was okay for all these reasons and it's been used for thousands of years, blah, 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 blah. Well, first of all, we're not the same as we were 1,000 years ago, right? We're living in a much more toxic environment, much more overstimulated environment, much more depleted environment. We are much more depleted genetically, on and on and on. So it's not the same situation. Second of all, don't worry about any of that theory. just try it. Just try going a month without any stimulants, and I could probably tell you how you'll feel. It will be dreadful because you won't have artificial energy to keep you going for the first time. But after a while, if you do that and you start having all the good stuff like we talked about, if you have all the tonic herbs, if you're hydrating, if you've got electrolytes, you've got marine phytoplankton, if you do the other things Angela's going to ask me about next, stack all that together instead of the stimulants, and you'll actually feel pretty good. And it won't be what you're used to. It won't be this like kind of thing that you might be used to with a coffee or whatever. It'll be more of a like a level, like a centered, like a balanced energy, right? A long-term energy. And it will be easy to get going in the morning, and it will be easy to get to sleep at night. Right? Whereas most of us who have these stimulants, then we've got to have depressants to get us to sleep, right? We've got to have alcohol, we've got to have cannabis, we've got to have mind-numbing TV, whatever it might be, right? Just to calm us down enough to kind of knock us out, and then we get up and we didn't sleep well because we knocked ourselves out the night before. So then we need stimulants to get us going. And I'm just saying all this because A, as I said, biggest dummy in the world, did it for years. But B, like if you recognise this at all, there is another way. And like, is it very easy and smooth to step out of that? No. In fact, I would recommend if you are very chronically hooked on things like coffee and cigarettes and you know that it's not good for you, but you don't know what to do, don't try removing them like everyone tells you to. Try adding all the stuff we're talking about today. I've had so many clients come to me and say, Elwin, you know, I have a cup of Rejuvenate in the morning and then I realise I don't need my coffee anymore, right? Or for me, I had my marine phytoplankton and then I realised I didn't need to smoke. You know, it was like it was giving me that same hit. It was awesome.
Wow, that's amazing. So you got off cigarettes through using marine phytoplankton, or that?
Not just, admittedly, but like that temptation to have like a little energy hit. That's what I would have gone to traditionally, right? Was a cigarette, just like to give me a hit, to get my mind going, right? Because there's a correlation between nicotine and acetylcholine, right? So acetylcholine is the memory brain neurotransmitter, and nicotine is almost the same. In fact, it fits in the same receptor cells. So normally, if I was trying to do brain work in the past, I would have a cigarette, but I used the marine phytoplankton instead, and it worked.
So what was coming to my mind when you were speaking then was it's not that we don't want to ever use any reserve energy, right? It's not like we get some that we're born with and we want to just like hoard it and never use any of it our whole lives. It's that we want to kind of use it wisely and do our best to kind of keep nourishing that system, it sounds like, so that we can kind of like live for as long as we can and share our creative gifts with the world as best we can, like through using that energy rather than it all being used up on crazy things. Does that sound?
That sounds like a perfect Western perspective. I'll tell you what the Eastern perspective is, because I've only learned this year, Angela, and it's like been real like a mind blower for me. It's this idea of, okay, so this Jing energy, I always kind of felt exactly like what you just said, that makes perfect sense. So it's not that we can't use the reserve energy. If we want to have a really great night out, if we want to whatever, we can do it, as long as it isn't every night, you know. So it's okay to use a bit of reserve energy to do something, as long as it's an occasion rather than just to drag ourselves out of bed. That always made sense to me. But the Taoist perspective is this, that we have this thing called a spirit or soul. In fact, that they would say we have 5. We have 1 for each of our organ systems. So we have a spirit in our heart, the supreme commander, as my teacher calls it, the original spirit. We have our soul, a hun soul in our liver. We have a p soul in our lungs. We have an intention spirit in our spleen, and then we have will spirit in our kidneys. And so all of these spirits, from a Taoist point of view, they're quite young. And so they need to grow, they need to develop, they need to evolve. So this idea of evolution isn't actually new, you know, from a Taoist perspective, it's been there for thousands of years, but it's our souls and our spirits which evolve. Anyway, what they need to evolve and develop is this reserve energy, this Jing. So if we're alive for, say, 120 years, with a decent level of Jing throughout, then that allows 120 years for our souls and spirits to develop. If we're only alive for 60 years and we spend 30 of those kind of depleted and 15 of those kind of under the influence of mind-numbing substances, then we've only actually had 15 years of allowing our spirit and soul to develop, right? So from their point of view, they would actually, it depends who you speak to actually, it depends which Taoist you speak to, but a pure Taoist perspective would actually say we want to just hoard it all the time actually. Yeah, obviously if you need to, recover from an illness, then that's what it's there for. If you need to run away from someone trying to kill you, something trying to kill you, that's what it's there for. But they would say always conserve it, because the point of being a human being in the first place is to be a connector between the earth and the heavens, and to be kind of like a training ground, a place where souls and spirits go to experience the world and learn and grow and evolve and develop. And in order to do that, they need that reserve energy. That's what they feed on. So for anyone who is watching this who does have a spiritual kind of bent, I'd say it's an interesting perspective to maybe be aware of, maybe look at. And so to realise that if you are smoking or drinking or whatever it may be, you are not only robbing yourself of health, you are robbing your spiritual soul of the chance to grow and evolve and develop, which is something that has repercussions even beyond this world. It's something that really matters.
You slammed that one. My goodness. Wow, there's going to be some people taking some deep breaths at home, I'm sure.
I hope so.
Speaking of deep breaths, another thing that seems to be a very key part of your program, and that is another thing that comes up in my life all the time, is kind of proper breathing practices for dealing with stress and overwhelm and exhaustion, all these kind of things. And you talk especially about rejuvenative breathing. Do you want to kind of go into that a little bit for us?
Firstly, I'm so glad that you picked up on that one, because it's one of the most it's the most challenging thing in that book by far. Everything is very easy. Getting yourself to do breathing practices isn't. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge that for anyone who is exhausted. Oh my God, I know how difficult that is. Yes, it is difficult, but it's so important. It's so worthwhile. I won't go into like a huge thing about it, but I will just say that, like I mentioned, often it's one of the roots of the problem, right? We don't breathe properly, so we don't have enough chi, we don't have enough ATP, we don't have enough everyday energy, and that's why we then constantly dip into our reserves. So it's a huge, huge thing. Also, if we breathe in the improper way, we're constantly breathing into the chest, which is overstimulating the heart, which leads to that thing that we talked about the heart being too hot and draining the kidneys. If we breathe the other way, if we breathe into our belly, then we're activating that Danchen energy center, the Japanese call it the Hara energy center, which connects and relates to the kidneys. So every breath that we take into the belly is actually nourishing and nurturing and feeding the kidneys. So the type of breathing, again, there's like, if you go to High Energy Academy, Angela, which I know you've just started on, you'll see I've got 4 different types of breathing practices in there. I've got the present breath, which is something that anyone can do at any time, which is just to stop, take a deep breath in, and in fact, I won't try and explain it now. You can perhaps leave people with a link to a free training about that particular breathing practice. Awesome, okay. And we do what I call power breath, which is where we actually breathe into the kidneys. So that's like a more advanced one that you'll probably enjoy as you're developing this relationship with your kidneys. You can send it force, and that's one of those ones where you can feel like you feel warmer and you feel more focused, and you boost your kidneys straight away. But the rejuvenating breath, which is the one I put in Easy Exhaustion Cure, it's the most fundamental one, is where we are. First of all, we're learning to breathe into the belly, but second, most importantly, we are relieving all that tension which is stuck inside us. So the Taoists would say it's actually fire energy. Because ironically, I always found this ironic anyway, when I went to see my Chinese herbalist, they said, the problem with you've got too much fire. I'm like, I'm always cold. Like, literally, I'd have to wear 2 pairs of socks in bed, like in the summer, because my feet were so cold all the time. So I had problems reconciling this thing of I have too much fire. But the thing is that the fire is stuck, it's trapped. It tends to get trapped, especially in the heart, and the head, in the liver, and then it's not reaching the rest of the body. So what this rejuvenating breath does, which is so powerful, it releases some of that trapped heat, which then allows all the energy to flow, which ironically often then means that your hands warm up, your feet warm up, you feel calmer. But here's the main thing, it's releasing that anxiety, it's releasing that fear, it's releasing that tension, it's releasing that overstimulation which gets the mind racing and racing and racing. So just, I say 10 breaths of that in a row. It's so powerful that any negative emotional state you're in, if you do 10 breaths properly as outlined, the emotion will be gone. Yeah. Now that's really good to not believe me about that, but to actually test it. right? I don't know if you have an opportunity to test it yet, Angela. You have, awesome, asking about that. But yeah, so when you're in the midst of, if you're upset or you're anxious about something, just stop, do the rejuvenating breath. Within a few minutes, you'll feel completely different. And that is so powerful because these negative emotional states, especially fear, but all of them, anger and anxiety and worry and frustration, they all drain us. They all deplete our reserves again. So just be able to come back into center, back into balance. Also, we're giving our body oxygen, which is energy. Also, we're getting out toxins. The main form of toxins that we have in our body are actually gas kind of toxins, which I know Matt talks about. But we need to release them from our lungs, not just our intestines. So we detoxify through our lungs. So everything gets better when we do the rejuvenating breath for just a few minutes a day. And when we're really serious and we start doing it longer, like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, even 30 minutes, we can end up feeling like just a totally new person. Like we go from to So what's your experience with it? I know you've just started, but
It's interesting. I feel like my whole life I've received the message from spirit or the universe or whatever you want to call it. Breathe properly. I felt like this message was always coming through to me. Breathe properly, breathe properly. And I never knew really what it meant. But I would always kind of like try to pay attention to it and like just breathe better into my belly and those kind of things. And, I feel like that's one of the most simple things that anybody can do in any kind of stressful situation is just to stop and take a few deep breaths because it changes everything. And yeah, from reading your book and learning about the rejuvenative breathing, I've started to do that method the last few days. And I just feel like it takes it to a whole other level again. It's like just really powerful and like focused on this energy. It feels like rejuvenative energy, like you call it the rejuvenative breathing. It just feels like it's kind of refreshing everything inside and just bringing a whole other level of energy for me. So yeah, I just appreciate all of this stuff so much. It's really cool.
That's awesome. Oh, so you've already been doing the breathing practice for a while. Yeah, so for anyone who's never even tried breathing practice before, rejuvenating breath, just to warn you, can be a little bit of a challenge. Like it's something that you might not feel better with straight away. But if you've done breathing practice already, which I'm sure a lot of your audience has, then you just try the rejuvenating breath and then you're just going to be like, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, another thing from the book that I've been doing the last few days that also I felt has been like super powerful. I think it's actually behind me in the bathroom right there right now, rather than on my desk. Magnesium oil. Again, another thing that is just like hanging around our house. Maybe not everybody has it hanging around their house, but we have lots of stuff. And I was like, magnesium oil? Seriously? So I just like went and got it and started putting it on, and I totally feel it. Like from the second that I put it on, it's like it's energizing, but it's also like calming at the same time somehow. So maybe talk to us a bit about magnesium oil.
Yeah, I mean, you just described the effects in a nutshell. I mean, there's supposed to be like over 300 different processes that magnesium works on, blah, blah, science stuff. But the bottom line that you notice if you actually take it is I have more energy and I'm more relaxed, So that's just awesome. Most people are depleting magnesium. That's what I'll add about it. 90% of the population, something like that. Now, it's one of those root things. So, people are more into taking things like zinc or iron and things like that. And all, they all work together, these minerals. They're like a symphony, they're like an orchestra. But the electrolytes, sodium, magnesium, potassium, calcium, really mentioned them, and chloride, they're like the base section. They're the thing that keeps everything else going. And so the thing that you're most likely to be depleted of is magnesium. So it's like the weak link in the chain for the vast majority of people. And if you listen to the description of it, it sounds very much like Jing, like the kidney energy, in that it's something that the more depleted you are of magnesium, the more anxiety and stress and fear you experience. The more anxiety and stress and fear you experience, the more depleted you become in magnesium. And so it can be this vicious circle. And so I know there's a lot of purists out there who think that they should be able to get everything from food. Probably not with your audience, because you do the raw food world, thank God. But it's one of those things where you just can't get enough from food once you're deficient in it. right? And it's, it'd be nice if you could, so you have to get it in supplemental form. But even then, most oral supplements, if you're very deficient, especially if your digestion isn't very good, which again for most of it's not the first thing you should focus on, which is why I don't even mention digestion in easy exhausting cure, right? So we need to get those kidneys strong before anything. But if your digestion is not good, then you just don't get enough. And so again, like we said, the marine phytoplankton, the beauty of that is you put it under your tongue, get straight into your brain, straight into your cells, awesome. It's the same with the magnesium oil. You can just spray it on your skin and it can go straight into your cells and immediately you can feel better. And that's what we need, especially if we're exhausted. We need things that make us feel better immediately.
Yeah, I've been loving it. I'm kind of like, oh man, I hope this effect doesn't wear off. Like I just like adapt to it.
Well, it will do. Like when you actually have enough, when you're not deficient in it, then you'll spray it on and you won't notice anything. So, but that's okay. That by then you'll be more chilled and more energized, and that'll be normal.
Yeah.
It took a while for me, to be honest. It took, I don't know, 2 years to get my magnesium back up. But I was very depleted. I don't know how long it'll be for you or anyone else.
So there's so many other things that you share in your book, but again, in a very accessible, easy to follow, just amazing way. It's genius, like the way everything's just like so simple to follow. There's so many other things that we could talk about, but I don't want to like go into everything. One more thing that that really spoke to me was I loved when you spoke about the importance for people who are in this kind of state of like exhaustion and overwhelm to do purposeless activities. I just thought so classic. And you described, just do something like there is for no reason, like do something and there's no kind of like reason why you're doing it. You're just doing it and it's purposeless, but you're doing it. And that really spoke to me because I definitely have this kind of mindset of, it feels like there's got to be kind of like a purpose for doing everything at every moment of the day. It's like I'm achieving something, I'm doing something, and it's like I can't almost kind of even justify something in my head if it doesn't feel like it has like a logical purpose to it. Like, why would I just go for a random walk somewhere if I'm not gonna do something purposeful on that walk? You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have. So that really spoke to me. If you maybe want to expand on that.
Sure. Well, I'll just say first of all that the mindset you have generally leads to success, right? So if you had none of that, then you probably wouldn't be where you are. So if for anyone who can relate to that, it is a good thing. If you read like a Napoleon Hill book, he says the worst thing of all is to be drifting, right? To just move through life completely aimlessly, and unfortunately, a lot of people, that is kind of their situation. So it's not like we want to be in that place either. But what it is that we want to have a balance, right? And so this purposeful activity, this achieving something, this logical thing, this is all very yang, right? This is all very fire, leading back to this hot heart thing. So this is an excess of fire, an excess of yang kind of thing. And so, as I say, that's okay. And, we could call it an imbalance, or we could call it, something that leads to a greater chance of success. But the challenge is when it's such an imbalance that you end up depleted or exhausted. And so this is something that I've noticed again and again among people who are successful, is that they burn out, and as the phrase is, burn out, right? That indicates an excess of fire, an excess of yang. And so what's really awesome for people like that, people like you, people like me, probably most of the people watching, is to do the opposite, to do yin activity. And so what is a yin activity? A lot of my clients have struggled to get their head around this. I explained it in the book in a way I think that you got it beautifully, so that's good. I'm glad it makes sense in there. But basically, it's not the activity, it's the way that you do it, right? So you can go for a walk, and you can do it because I'm burning off 300 calories, and because it meets my quota of at least 30 minutes exercise a day, and because then I get to see flowers, and it's good for me to see flowers, you know what I mean? And if you have that kind of mentality to it, it's a yang kind of activity, and it'll be quite apparent to anyone if they were to observe you doing it, looking at your facial expression, looking at the way you were holding your body, looking at the pace and tempo of how quick you were moving, all that kind of thing. yep, that person's in a yang state, right? And so it's just really, really good to, and it's funny, Angela, because, you know, as all teachers, the first person who I had to teach this to is me, and still sometimes I forget. And I realized recently, like, not enough of that, not enough purposeless activity, right? Not enough just doing something and just being and not thinking about anything that I need to do, not planning, not preparing, not da. So making space for that again. And it's something that I've had to remind myself over and over again because of my energetic tendency, and you'll probably find the same thing. So that's so huge. But for anyone who doesn't just need a reminder, for anyone who hasn't even heard that before, just to understand that yin activity, which is purposeless activity, is fueling, it's feeding, it's adding yin, it's adding this cool water energy to the kidneys, it's replenishing you, it's rejuvenating you, it's building you back up again. So now it's a bit of a trick to it, because people think, okay, so I've got, like, the really yang person then goes, okay, so I have to do purposeless activity so that I can build up my batteries. Okay, so you know, it's like, how do I do it? So it's not easy. You have to kind of train yourself to do it to begin with if it's not something that's normal to you. However, for a lot of people watching this, it may not be a matter of you need to retrain yourself to do it. Like for me, it may just be a matter of you need to stop beating yourself up for doing it. Because you might find you're already doing it. You're already just aimlessly doing things. Now, I will say that in terms of purposeless activity, sure, browsing on Facebook or YouTube is kind of like going for a walk. They both can be purposeless activities, but of the two, going for a walk is probably a lot more recharging and replenishing than browsing on Facebook or YouTube or whatever. But to be honest, if it were a choice of no purposeless activity or browsing on Facebook or YouTube, then it'd be better to browse on Facebook or YouTube. You know, it's like any purposeless activity is better than no purposeless activity. And it can seem so weird and so counterintuitive when you are behind, when you are someone who's just being productive, when there's all these people waiting. I mean, I don't know how many emails I've got right now that I haven't replied to yet, and all the rest of it. And then just take some time out, as I just did, in fact, just to have some quiet time. Right? Just to have some time of not trying to achieve anything, not doing anything, not reacting or responding to anything either, not dealing with people's demands. Now you may say, oh, and you're very lucky to be able to do that. I can't do that. Fair enough. I may be lucky to be able to take 2 days off to do that, but we can all find a bit of space to do that. Right? Even if it's only a few minutes here, even if it's giving the kids to someone and doing whatever's necessary to get a couple of hours, and then actually spending that in replenishing ourselves and recharging ourselves, not distracting ourselves or stimulating ourselves, you know, that's just hugely beneficial.
Yeah, and I feel like this speaks so clearly to new parents as well. It's like, you know, I speak to so many women who talk about the fact that they feel like they can't get anything done, right, now that they have a child, especially because of the kind of societies that we come from, where there's this whole kind of like women can do it all idea of like you should have a career and a child and run your whole household and be the perfect wife and when you have a new child, there can be this really strong feeling of I can't get anything done, and like every moment should be something purposeful, and you're trying to like cram in as much as possible, and you're just kind of like giving all the time, you know, and it's like you're already in a depleted state because you just, you know, created another human being out of your body, and your body's like trying to recover from that. And I feel like this is something that would be really key for new mums to hear, is it's okay to just like really take a break and do stuff that might seem like purposeless, and you might be like, well, yeah, but what about the dishes and the laundry? And, you know, I just feel like we got to be like kinder on ourselves and be really aware of this reserve energy and adaptive energy and kidney energy thing that you're talking about. And something that you mentioned recently was you were saying for your own partner, like if she was to ever become pregnant, she kind of has the idea of building up all of this reserve energy before like even ever getting pregnant, to make sure that she's like really well covered for that whole picture. So I'm sure like other people would be really interested to hear what would that look like? Like if somebody has never had a child, or they maybe already have one child, or and they want to have another one or something, like what could they be doing to try to help this reserve energy as much as possible?
Well, great question. And I mean, really, it's everything that's outlined in the Easy Exhaustion Cure and even more detail in High Energy Academy. Because while, I mean, High Energy Academy is more for people who are in that position that you're talking about, that they're proactively thinking ahead. You know, how can I have more reserves rather than, you know, recovering from severe depletion, which is more what the Easy Exhaustion Cure is about. But basically, it's doing the same stuff we really talked about proactively to realize that there's no such thing as an excess of reserve energy. I mean, people have high levels of reserve energy. They'll tend to be very potent, very fertile, you know, so a much greater chance of getting pregnant, much greater chance of carrying the baby to term, much greater chance of that baby being healthy, you know, being full of energy itself, being balanced, being strong, being immune, being all those things that we would want our child to be. Also being intelligent, you know, because Jing relates to our brain power especially, and so we don't have a lot of Jing, and you know we're not necessarily passing on enough for our children. So there's all kinds of stuff. So the thing to realise, you can't have an excess of it. So even if you're doing all right now, you can do all the stuff we've talked about to build up more in preparation for when you only have half of your own. Right? Because let's say you need 50 points to get through the day of Jing, and let's say that right now you got 70, you might think that you're doing great, you know, you're rocking and rolling. But what about when you get pregnant? Then you're going to have 35 points for you and 35 points for the baby, and suddenly you're going to be running on a deficit. And then what about when you give birth? And then suddenly you're going to be docked 30 points because you're now giving that to the baby, and now you're down to 40, you know, and then you're breastfeeding, which is another 10 points that you've got every day. And then you're so what I'm saying is, even if you're doing well now, even if you're kind of, you know, doing above and doing better than most of your friends or the people around you, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to carry on being that way, you know, during pregnancy, during childbirth, during being a young mother or a new mother. So the more you can get proactive about this, and so, you know, there are certain things which you can have a limit of, right? So you have a limit of hydration, you know, and you can have a limit of electrolytes, right? You don't want too many of them, but you can't really have too many tonic herbs of the type that we just talked about. I mean, I suppose you can, like with anything, you know, you could go totally crazy and have like a kilo a day or something like that, but it would be very difficult, right? You can pretty much go for it. So you can do the breathing exercise to keep rejuvenating yourself, you know. I mean, in terms of the purposeless activity, I heard a story recently from one of my friends, Isaiah, who's just like a beautiful, very, very impressive human being to me. He looks like kind of like a Tony Robbins, but a lot like a calmer version. He's great. And he was talking about when his wife had his baby, and he refused to let anyone in the house for 3 months, and it was just the two of them, and the only focus was looking after the baby for both of them, you know. And again, not everyone can do that, maybe practically. I don't think it was easy for him either. He just, you know, did whatever it took to create that kind of situation. He said that was so important, and they had like soothing music all the time, and no bright lights, and no stimulation, and no TV, and no computer, and so that, you know, the baby had a chance to really have this purposeless activity, right? And to get that Jing early on. The mother had a chance to have this purposeless activity to recover all her yin energy. And so even though, you know, it's nice to have family and friends around, all the rest of it, it's also more people to feed, more people to deal with, more people's, you know, baggage to take on, more nonsense, you know. And so just to have that space, and yeah, that sounded you know, really awesome to me as well. That's the thing that I'm going to take on if my wife and I, if she gets pregnant, and that'll be something that we implement as well. So not just before, but also during, also afterwards, to just minimize the stimulation, maximize the amount that we're nourishing ourselves of this energy in particular, and then with everything. And then, of course, detoxing. We haven't talked about detoxing, it's not really the focus, but I would say, like, the ideal situation for anyone who wants to get pregnant, who isn't pregnant yet, is, first of all, get your reserves up. Second of all, clear away the waste trapped in your system, the blockages trapped in your system. Then maybe do some strengthen yourself. Then you're in an optimal position. So basically those 3 steps. So recover, replenish, all the stuff we talked about today. Detoxify as well, that would be next. And then third, you know, make yourself really strong. I mean, I've got a friend right now who is 8.5 months pregnant, and she's hiking up a mountain. she's strong. No doubt about that. So not only is she, the other stuff, but she's actually strong as well. And I'm betting anything that'll be a strong baby as a result of that.
Wow. So I feel like what I'm hearing you say is that even if we are born without the strongest genetics and we maybe don't have the greatest reserves in our body, we have so many opportunities in this life to, build that up and take care of that whole system for ourselves. It's not like it's some kind of hopeless case. If somebody's watching this and thinking, well, I come from really kind of rubbish genetics, we really have a genuine opportunity to take care of this for ourselves and to then even pass on a better situation to our children. That's what I'm hearing. Does that sound right?
Absolutely right. It's a cliche, but it's that thing about it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. It's easier than ever before in this day and age to severely deplete ourselves, to wreck our genetics with epigenetics, to give birth to children who are severely disadvantaged. And it's easier than ever before to do the exact opposite, to build ourselves up, to make ourselves stronger, to make ourselves clearer even than our ancestors were. We have an amazing opportunity in front of us, but the trick of it is to take it, right? To first realize it's there, like you said, and then consistently take it. And then often there's all kinds of more spiritual stroke psychological elements to that. Like, for instance, if you had a mindset that what life is really all about is what I talked about earlier, nourishing and developing your soul and spirit, it might be different from, I'll just get by, and if I die, so what kind of thing. I'll let my children sort it out, which is kind of more the thing that unfortunately we have had, and maybe some people around us might even recognise that in still. And yeah, in terms of are you disadvantaged, like I said, mid-20s, pretty much as depleted as a person can be at that age, and now am I in a place where I'm like a superhuman with it? No, but I would say I'm better than average with this particular issue, right? I would say I'm probably like averagely healthy rather than severely depleted in terms of the kidneys, and a lot of other things are doing great. So now, I've only been doing this for 5 or 6 years, though. What will be like if I carry on and do all this stuff for another 10 years, 20 years? And, eventually it gets to the point where you're reversing the aging process. And, I don't look particularly younger than my age now, but I do look younger now than I did 10 years ago, because I used to look like an old man when I was a young man. And this is what I observe as well, and people who've been doing this a long time. One of my teachers, Master Cheer, he's now 70 years old, right? And, he looks younger, but in terms of he's so incredibly strong, he's so incredibly full of vitality, and he's been doing this stuff for 40 years, right? And it just goes to show the longer you do this for, rather than you and many people who teach Qigong who I've come across, many people who teach Tonic herbalism who I've come across, they started off depleted, and now they're in this place where they are, very, very superior in terms of the other people around them in this particular facet of their lives. And so yes, practice is the most important thing. The other psychological thing I'll say about this is that so many people, we need to get rid of this thing about things being fair, right? Because if we have this idea of it's not fair, I was only given 20 kidney points by my parents, and my friend was given 200 kidney points, and he gets to eat junk food, and she gets to never exercise, and she gets to snort cocaine all day in her $200,000 a year trading job, and then still gets up at 6 a.m. feeling perky, and it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair. Well, the first thing to realize is that eventually it will catch up with them. And the challenge is that we tend to get set in our ways as human beings. So I see it as a blessing that all that outrageously stupid behaviour that I did caught up with me in my mid-20s rather than in my mid-40s. Because if it had caught up with me in my mid-40s, I would have been so much more solidified and set in my ways. The chances that I would have turned things around like I have would be massively reduced. So for anyone who is in that position, see it as a benefit, see it as a fortunate thing rather than an unfair thing, that you were given the challenge which allowed you to become aware of the opportunity of becoming extraordinary, and to allow your children to become extraordinary too.
Yeah, wow. Something else that is coming to mind for me is I've often heard that if people have a lot of children, It's usually the case that the last child or children are the ones who don't have the greatest start in terms of, they probably have significant weaknesses in their bodies. They're much more likely to be ill and to have, I mean, of course, it can also be related to the age of the mother, but it just seems like there's a strong correlation between, the mother's body keeps creating more humans out of itself. And then, by the time you get to whatever, like the fifth or the sixth child or something, they are often not the strongest examples of what a human could be like. And so I find what you're sharing really inspiring from that point of view as well. Not that I particularly want to have a lot of children myself, I don't, but just the idea that if somebody did want to have a lot of children, potentially they could keep filling their reserves. And potentially sidestep that kind of picture, at least to a better degree than somebody who, doesn't know about any of this and is just kind of going about their lives in a more kind of standard way.
Absolutely, yeah. And so it depends on the situation. I mean, so yeah, generally the fifth or sixth child would be more depleted, more toxic, right? Because the mother has got more depleted and more toxic. But it can be the other way around. And so, the person is doing all this stuff like we've been talking about, like, for those who are going to check out my free trainings, you'll see there's more detail in there because I think we've gone on quite a long time already. There's a lot more like information there about getting yourself to a place where basically you're getting better. I mean, this is one of the things that I used to constantly feel like everything is just getting worse. Everything is getting worse. I'm getting worse. The world is getting worse, right? People are getting worse. Everything is getting worse. And then when my reserves came back again and everything started to come into balance and started to get stronger, I felt the other way around. It's like I keep getting better, and I keep getting stronger, and I keep getting smarter, and the world keeps getting better, and the world, keeps evolving, and people are nicer than they used to be. I don't know if any of it's true, whether it's just my perception, but it's good to get ourselves onto that track, like the things are getting better track. And so, yes, getting onto that track can involve some, sacrifices, like sacrificing our vices of, indulging in negative thinking, or our vices of dehydrating ourselves, or eating bad foods, or, whatever it might be, whatever it is that's depleting us. But it's not much of a sacrifice because it takes us from a place where basically life is a negative place because things are just getting worse for us, to a place where life is a positive place because things keep getting better. And like I say, some of the people who I know, some of my teachers, 60s, 70s, still feel exactly the same way, still feel like their life is getting better. So it isn't just the exuberance of youth that's talking here, because I know I could be accused of that being only in my mid-30s. No, it really is true. You keep doing this stuff, things just keep getting better.
I love it. And I guess what I feel from looking at all of your work, the things that you're sharing is I just feel like so much gratitude for what this can bring into the lives of so many other people in terms of helping them to feel like much more strong and capable versions of themselves. And then, what are those people able to bring to the world and offer to the world? And what's their service? What are they here for? That's kind of like a strong thing that I get from your work, is it's really empowering for people to have the energy and have the resources to like fully show up in the world and like share their gifts. So I really honor that in what you're sharing, and I really appreciate everything that you're putting out there. So so for people to connect to your work, so one of the things is the Easy Exhaustion Cure book. So we'll give a link for that. And then tell us about the other things that you have and kind of where it's best to find you and all that kind of stuff.
Awesome, yeah. I mean, if we can make it really easy for people, just put some links underneath wherever you're going to put this, would that be okay?
Sure. Yeah, there we go.
So, so there's the Easy Exhaustion Cure, which Angela's already told you a lot about. You can check that out. There's High Energy Academy, so that's my kind of foundational program. I won't do like a huge thing about it, but basically, it's a combination of a series of trainings, kind of modules, kind of like doing a course. where you have the support of a community. We've got maybe 500 people now signed up to these various courses, and we meet together once a month at least, and we connect and we share. It's an opportunity to share any challenges you have, to ask any questions, to share successes. And a lot of the calls are actually sharing successes, which is really powerful because it inspires everyone else to realize that they can do that too, and it creates like a momentum effect, which I really enjoy. So yeah, it's that opportunity to get that full support for, first of all, getting really high energy, right? That's the most primary thing. That's my first program. It's my foundational program. For anyone who does not have high energy, that's the place that is the ideal starting place. Next is the Complete Detox Academy. We haven't talked about detox, but there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And the wrong way to do it, one of the wrong ways to do it is to do it while you're still depleted, right? Like we've really talked about. So there's certainly that. There's also, various other challenges that can come up with detox, like trying to detox, say, the liver when all the elimination pathways aren't clear yet, So I won't go into that now, but if you want a free training on that, Angela will hopefully put a little link for that for you. And then the Taoist Health and Fitness Academy, and that's the one for anyone who already feels like they're doing pretty good, or anyone who feels like they're on top of their main current challenges, but they want to know advanced Taoist practices. They want to know, they want to really understand this Taoist system. They want to understand the 5 elements. They want to understand exactly what the kidneys means, how to feed them. They want to understand how to get to a really high level. Now, I can't say that I'm an amazingly high level or anything, but the practices that I do have got me to the level that I'm at. And I know that those practices, if I continue doing them, they'll get me to the level that my teachers are at. And some of the things are pretty extraordinary, right? Like, we haven't talked about this, but if you have an absolute abundance of Jing, after a certain level, it makes you become very charismatic. It kind of pulls people magnetically towards you. After a certain level more, you can even use it in a martial purpose. So there's the kind of thing of for instance, being able to knock someone across the room without even touching them. That's the kind of thing that requires a certain amount of Jing, called empty force. After a certain level, again, there's like potential healing capacities, like you can just touch someone and the meridians or their organs or whatever, and you start healing them. And so again, you don't have to believe in any of that stuff, but for those who do believe in that stuff, that's the kind of mechanism by which it works, the more Jing you have. And so I do just mention that in passing because a lot of people I know who are on this call, or I reckon, Angela, are going to be healers of some kind. They're going to be people trying to help people, trying to make the world a better place, and that's awesome. But the challenge with that is it's using up your Jing energy again, right? So it's something to be aware of. And so again, if you're a healer, if you're into that kind of thing, I'd definitely recommend Taoist Health and Fitness Academy because it gives you those practices that really help to get you to a place where you're more of a conductor for the universal energy. So you're more powerful, you're able to have more flow through you, you're able to have more energy to really be able to help other people. As well as, of course, if you're talking about, Angela, people maybe preparing because they want to be pregnant again or whatever it might be. So that's the advanced one.
Wow, I love it. So great. Just such wonderful things that you're sharing with the world. So thank you so much, Elwin, for being on this call and sharing everything that this went on way longer than I think either of us thought it would. But yeah, just so much great information, and I really honor and appreciate what you're sharing with people. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity to share this with your audience, Angela. It's a real pleasure, and thank you for giving me so much time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really encourage everyone watching this, if you find any resonance with anything that we've been talking about, check out the things that Elwin is sharing. You won't regret it. And he even gives you like a total guarantee. Like if you get his things and then you feel like you didn't get any kind of benefit from them, he'll just give you like a total refund. So there's like risk-free. Just go and like get the easy exhaustion cure and check it out. Like I said, it's like 300 pages long, this book, and I was like, oh man, 300 long page book, but I just like blew through it. It's so easy to read, it's so practical, and it makes a difference. It's seriously going to make a difference in your life. I love it. So
the program as well, Angela, comes with an audio of the whole thing. So for anyone who does struggle to read 300 pages, then it's something you can listen to while you're in your car or while you're cleaning or whatever. It's you can listen to the whole thing instead as well.
That's a great idea, yeah. That works a lot easier for a lot of people these days. So yeah, check out all of those things that Elwin is sharing. And thank you so much again, Elwin, for being here. I really appreciate it.